I'm Lisa Senecal.
And I'm Maya May, and We're Speaking starts now.
Welcome to 2022, and We're Speaking, everybody.
We did it. We're here. 2022. Yes.
That's a good thing, right?
I think so.
It's going to be a good year. We thought 2021 was going to be that, like, yay, it's 2021. It's going to be so much better.
But what we really meant was it's all coming together in 2022.
That's right.
Got these New Year's resolutions that I am implementing. I've decided I'm going to pace myself. All right, we're just going to pace, but that's so important. And I'm going to stay solutions minded. That's what I'm doing. What about you, Lisa?
Yeah, I'm not usually a big New Year's resolution person because I think it's really easy, like after you screw up your New Year's resolution, to say, oh, fuck it. Like, oh, well, it's January 10th, already blew the New Year's resolution. And so I'm just going to, go back to whatever it was that I was resolving not to do. But this year, I'm going to resolve over and over again to remind myself that there are more democracy-loving, pro-democracy, good, true Americans in this country than there are authoritarian-minded folks. And we're the majority, and we need to act like it. And we are going to act like it. And 22 is going to be a really important, really good year for democracy in America.
Yes, understanding that good will prevail. We must make it a habit. Even if on January 10th, you're like, no, over and over again. I love it, Lisa. You're just going to keep coming back to it. And hopefully you've taken some time to relax and recharge. If you haven't, you still have time because there's a ton of work to do this year going into the midterms. But know we will be with you every step of the way, right? Even if it feels a little hopeless sometimes.
Yeah, it does sometimes, but then we have to, it is that going back and reminding ourselves what is real, which a lot of folks are sort of detached from now, but the reality is that what we see on TV, what we see on social media, that's not the reality of the situation. We have a lot more power and control and ability to take things in the right direction than we think that we do if we only look at things through social media and Lord Fox News or whatever insanity.
Oh God, it's still here. No, I was hoping we'd lose it over the new year. That's what I'd love to have happened. Yes, we have to look at the big picture energy. That's part of the reason why we always bring on experts. They help provide the frameworks that we need to make sense of what's happening with our democracy. And they will give us the tools that we need to continue to protect it, to continue to build it. It is an ongoing process.
Yep, it is. So that is how we're starting 2022, with hope, with intention. But not just with hope. We need to understand the steps, the real actions that we can all take to save our democracy so we can stay focused.
Laser focused.
Yes, laser focused. And our guests have some ideas today. They dug really deep into Republican efforts to overturn the 2020 election. They examined the events leading up to the election and beyond, and with a fine-tooth comb, incredibly well-researched. What they found out could offer a bit of hope, which is very on brand for our show today and for the year. So believe it or not, they are coming in with hope. So let's bring them out right now.
Yes. Hello. Joining us now are Mark Bowden and Matthew Teague, authors of the just released book, The Steal, The Attempt to Overturn the 2020 Election and the People Who Stopped It. Welcome to the show, Mark, Matthew. Hello. Happy New Year.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, both of you, for being here. This is an incredible book. And I can't imagine the amount of time and research that went into this. So to just give folks a bit of a frame of reference, can you give us an overview of the purpose and the premise of the book?
You want to do it, Matt?
Well, I would say we first of all, we just wanted to set down a record of things that had happened. Morgan Entrekin, the publisher of the book, it was his idea. Looking at the things that are happening in Congress, we weren't sure whether there would ever be a real thorough accounting of things that had happened around the country. The other is that I think there's two mistakes that people are making when they think right now about January 6th of last year. The first is to look away from it and just ignore it. The other is to look at it fixated on the details in isolation instead of the context. You talked about framework in your intro. And I think that's what we wanted to do, is bring that context and say, why did this happen? How did we get to this place?
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important, because without that framework, without this information, it is easy for people to look away and kind of hope that it goes away, which we all know it's obviously not. It was a part of something larger that we're finding out a bit more and more about as we go along. It starts with the underlying premise that even before the 2016 election, Trump was, as you say, grooming his supporters to expect fraud, which is basically like 4 years of overtly attacking our voting process. Why would you say, Mark, why was it so important to start the book there?
Well, Maya, I think that as Matt was saying, so much focuses on Trump and his inner circle and the events that occurred on January 6th. In fact, as you say, his efforts to undermine the American election system began years ago. In fact, I think in 2012, he did not expect to win. And so one of the things he began doing was throwing shade on the electoral process, saying that it wasn't fair and that it would be stolen from him. He unexpectedly won, but he never changed his tune. And even through the election of 2016, he was telling his supporters that the only way he could lose is if the Democrats stole the election. So, when he lost the election, began a process really on election day of trying to overturn the election results. And to my mind, I think to our minds, what happened from election day to January 6th was really the substantive attack on the American electoral system, in focusing on the 6 swing states where things were close. So the truth of the story is that he couldn't change it. It turns out the American people are more honest than Donald Trump. Even
doesn't take
Trump,
much.
Low bar.
Election officials in the United States who were Trump supporters refused to be bullied into falsifying election results. So, what we found was a system that is really strong and that's run by your neighbors, your friends and neighbors, and they are not readily manipulated.
So I want to stick with what you just said a minute ago about Trump setting the stage for, in 2016, his loss. So he primed his supporters to believe that there was ongoing election fraud. And then suddenly when he won, it was, oh, no, free. Turns out totally free and fair election. No problem with it at all. It all turned out fine. And his supporters just went along with that. So did you get a sense when you were talking to so many folks for this book, why it is they are so willing to immediately make that shift along with Donald Trump to whatever he says reality is today? It was going to be a stolen election. Nope, it's completely free and fair because I won.
Mm-hmm.
Matt?
I think it's a consequence of the way that I think our media, these networks devoted to propaganda, social media on both sides of the coin, have convinced many Americans that they cannot trust the other side, that at heart their political enemies or their political opponents are anti-American. And that was at the heart of the movement against the election in 2016, and in the most recent election in 2020, it was that there's no way that the Democrats, who are in many places responsible for running the election will run it fairly. But interestingly, the attack on the election process, which I think is rooted in that basic distrust, ended up insulting a lot of Republicans, because in jurisdictions where Republicans are in control, like in many places in Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, these local Republican officials run what they consider to be fair elections. And here was Trump claiming that they too had been part of this vast conspiracy. So they found themselves being accused of something that they knew was false. And much to their credit, they most of them dug in their heels and refused to play along.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to have that context that they refused to play along, that they were, refused to be bullied. It's so very important, because it seems like stealing a a presidential election. What your book has proven is that it would almost be like an Ocean's 11 style operation, right? Like something that would even require, I don't know, a PowerPoint, but with thousands of people involved. Yet, according to a recent YouGov poll, 66% of Republicans actually believe the election was stolen. How do you respond to that?
Well, I would say that it's such a profoundly improbable thing, because one of the people that we focused on in the book was Cheryl Guy, who's a local county clerk in Antrim County, Michigan. And she made a mistake. She is a Republican and a Trump supporter herself, and voted for him. But she made a computer error and accidentally switched about 3,000 votes from Trump to Biden, so that Biden won her county. And that 3,000 votes set off alarms, not only in her county or her state or even the country, but around the world. Everybody sort of descended on this, private jets coming into this little county in rural Michigan to investigate where these 3,000 votes came from. So the notion that there could be hundreds of thousands or even millions of votes that were fraudulent is just laughable. It's just not possible.
Well, and I would add that, we have been holding elections in America for hundreds of years. And in the 20th century, in particular, with computer data and analyses, we know how virtually every district and neighborhood in the country is likely to vote. I mean, in certain cases, the reason that there are swing states is that these are states where the division is so small, we can't completely predict what's going to happen. But I mean, for one example, one of the counties that we write about is Delaware County, Pennsylvania, where they have a total of about 300,000 votes. And the Trumpists whose complaints about the election went all the way to the Supreme Court were alleging that as many as 70 to 100,000 of those 300,000 votes were fake Biden ballots. I mean, if that was true, even if it was marginally true, it would show so dramatically in the election results. You could look at districts that have traditionally been 60% Republican, 40% Democrat, and if suddenly it was 80, 90% Democrat, you would say, okay, something's wrong there. Just as that's what happened in Antrim County, Michigan, is that the vote total was wrong because Cheryl Guy made a mistake, and the whole world noticed. I mean, we're talking 3,000 votes. And so the idea that somehow hundreds of thousands of votes would be fraudulently switched would be so glaringly obvious that we wouldn't even, be having this discussion.
One of the things that seems so odd and doesn't get talked about that much, certainly not by Republicans at this point, is that the up and down the ballot, and there are a lot of Republicans who were elected on the same ballots that Trump lost on. And they don't seem to have any problem with the results of their election, but as though it was a separate election that happened, and then we just had a presidential election that was fraudulent. So again, it's that buy-in of the masses. It seemed like a lot of people reading the book that were willing to take on this fiction were already primed as either QAnon conspiracy believers, or they believe Trump's premise, or they just really don't understand how elections work in the United States. So what are the patterns you saw, and what can we do?
I think that, what you said, Lisa, is exactly true. And I would include myself in this. Before I started working on this book, to be honest, I never really understood exactly how elections worked in America. And so if you're coming from a place of ignorance and you're pissed off because your candidate lost, I mean, why not? I mean, it's easier to say, we actually won and we're ripped off, than it is to say that most Americans don't agree with us and we lost. So I think that accounts, frankly, for those, statistics that you mentioned, Maya, what 68% of Republicans. I think most of those people, if push came to shove, would admit that, well, it would be very hard to turn a national election, and the results were probably honest. Maybe we did lose. But people in this who are fostering this movement are not interested in documenting it. They're not interested in facts. They're only interested in sowing suspicion and furthering their political aims.
Yes.
And
yes.
to your point about people voting down ballot, one of the things that was previously unreported that we found for the book was that in Georgia, which Trump famously sort of harangued Secretary of State Raffensperger to find 11,000 plus votes.
Just find them.
Yeah, we've found that voters there were 28,000 of them who voted down ballot but didn't vote for anyone for president, which means that they just couldn't bring themselves, likely for more than half of those in Georgia, to vote for a president whatsoever. So that if Trump had simply appealed to people in maybe a more centrist way or whatever tactical way, he would have won the state that he ended up fighting so hard after he lost it.
And that's exactly right. He was so much a part of his own loss. It's comical, truly. And we're going to get to solutions in a minute, because when you talk about people not understanding how elections work, I think that's true across the board, because I know for myself, I certainly did not. And so education is going to be a big part of the piece. So we definitely want to talk about that. But before that, want to go back to this idea that it was not a isolated situation, but that it was a concerted effort by Republican-controlled states. And now it's continuing, that they're pushing out anyone who won't go along with this narrative. That's what we're seeing since January 6th. Does your hope still hold up for the upcoming elections, that we're in a good space?
It does for me. I mean, I in my district here in Chester County, Pennsylvania, there was a woman running who's a Trumpist, and she ran a platform claiming that she was going to make sure the election was held honestly. The truth is that she's going to be working alongside of hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, part-time workers from the state, and the idea that she can somehow convince all of these people to go along with a massive fraudulent effort speaks to my point about the American people are just not that dishonest. They want honest and fair elections. And we saw that in this election. We saw the failure of all these efforts in states across the country to get people to change the election count. Even the cyber ninja count in Arizona, which was clearly set up to prove that the election was fraudulent, ended up finding that, in fact, Biden got more votes than had been counted. And as Clint Hickman from Maricopa County, one of the elected officials that we write about, said to me, Arizonans are honest people. And when they volunteered or were hired to make this recount in Arizona, regardless of how the authors of the recount wanted it to turn out, the people they hired counted fairly and accurately and said, no, this is what the numbers say.
Love it.
I would add to that there's sort of two questions built into your question. And one is the question of fraudulent voting, voter fraud. And I think we established pretty definitively in the book that it would be exceedingly difficult, vanishingly difficult to do that. The second question, though, is a question of sort of rising authoritarianism in the United States, which I'm less optimistic about. But that comes down to a faith in the U.S. electorate, and I just have to hope that people won't go for that.
Yeah, the authoritarian impulse that has been exposed in so many on the right in particular is really terrifying. And although I do trust American voters, and like we were saying at the top of the show, I think there are more democracy loving, supporting Americans than there are people who lean authoritarian in the electorate. I don't think that that's true at this point in time in the Republican Party. And we're seeing in so many states that there's a real attempt to take the outcome of elections out of the hands of the voters, at least on the presidential level, and be able to choose a new slate of electors and toss out, if you don't like the outcome of an election, we're just going to toss it and we will determine what the outcome actually was. And that's being done at the level of state legislatures and governors. So how do we address that? Where is do you have faith that Republican held states are going to have the same integrity that the voters in those states have?
Well, I think your point about the threat of authoritarianism is real. And Matt and I have both spent a lot of time as journalists traveling and reporting around the world. And the truth is that in most places around the world, this is how people are governed. Democracy is still a relatively remarkable and rare phenomenon. And I think that we have to defend it. But having said that, I think that even though these efforts are underway in state legislatures all over the country, it would be, because of the nature of our election system, extremely difficult to overturn an election result. And I have no doubt that those efforts will be made, and those who are horrified by that should be mobilizing themselves to do everything they can to fight it. But I'm optimistic that these efforts will fail.
One can only hope, because what is a bit concerning to me is that when you have leaders who are basically making it valid to deny that an election was free and fair, that then justifies a lot of the political violence that we are seeing. And so that's, there was just an article, I don't know if you saw it, a few generals spoke up and said, like, hey, we actually need to be worried about this right now. Like, not to be alarmist, but we're sounding the alarm. And again, this is all premised on the idea that elections are not free and fair. Do you share that same concern about the political violence?
Well, I think January 6th was an outburst of that political violence that you're describing. So clearly it's possible, clearly it's real. But I think that it really amounted to the temper tantrum at the end of a long, assiduous campaign to overturn the election that was just unsuccessful. And so political violence is certainly possible, and unlikely, though, I think, to bring down American democracy at this point.
I think most people recognize that, you resort to violence when you have failed to prevail in a democratic system. And so it really does go to the core of our values as Americans, and whether we are willing to support the system even when our candidates lose. And I know many Democrats were woefully saddened when Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump in 2016, and there were plenty of Democrats who claimed that we should do away with the Electoral College, that the system is broken. How can somebody like Trump be elected? So I think that what we saw in the Trump movement and in January 6th was just a more extreme example of that sort of outcry by people who are angry that they lost.
Those angry people, there are a lot of them out there now, and you chronicle in your book the stories of so many really good people out there across the country who volunteer their time or are public servants who are doing really important work, but never chose to do that because they wanted to be heroes. They didn't want to risk their personal safety or the safety of their families. But that's what a lot of these folks have ended up facing. They're still facing that. Are you concerned that the really good, honest people we want involved in this process are going to self-select out because of the danger that they now face, the threats against them?
Hope
I
not.
think, yeah, yeah.
Some people, it actually is a motivator. I know I ran for school board here in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, and was elected. I probably would never have done that if I felt that it wasn't important or significant enough for people to stand up and be counted. And I think that I'm not that different than most Americans. I would think that as many people would be motivated to step up as would be motivated to step back.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful point because people are, it's again, talks to the integrity of the American people. Like when we come together and step up, that's when we see good results and positive results. And so hopefully we're seeing more and more of that. We have just a little bit to go. And so I really want to focus on these solutions and the steps that we can take between now and the next elections to ensure that people have a better understanding of how elections work. What would you recommend other than picking up your book? Of course, that's a very important important thing that people should do. But what would you recommend that people do to truly educate themselves?
This is going to sound so basic, but I would say read your news. The more you can do that, the more you can step away from sort of polemic cable news punditry, the better. Read your news would be, if I was talking to family and friends, that would be my first piece of advice.
Okay. I like it.
Yeah,
So it's like slowing it down. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's also good to engage, with people who are angry or skeptical, and listen to them. And and I think you would find, with some clear exceptions, and we document some of them in the book, most people would share, a basic agreement that elections need to be fair, that the losers need to concede at a certain point, that you can't govern in a democracy if one side claims it was ripped off. It's hard to swallow and say, we lost that election, and I'm really dismayed by the direction of the country. But that's how democracy works. Fitful start. I know when Obama was stepping out of office, he gave a talk, and he addressed this exact point. What can you do? And he recommended that people who are dismayed by this election result get involved. Get involved in politics, engage in conversation, run for local offices, and a lot of us took that very much to heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a graceful way to lose that doesn't divide and tear apart the country. It's like, no.
A democratic way.
Yes.
Right. If you don't, I mean, it's what I had preached at me at home and in school when I was growing up, that the beautiful thing about living in a democracy is if you don't like the way things are going, you can get involved, and you actually have the ability to have an impact on what is happening in your community, all the way up to presidential elections. So I am infected by your hope, which I really appreciate, because that's in short supply these days. Did you expect to come away, when you first started this project, when you were asked to do this project, did you expect to come away after your research and writing feeling as hopeful for the country as I think you both have shared you do?
Mark?
I didn't. I thought, frankly, as I said it earlier, I didn't really understand how elections were run in America. I, number one, was willing to consider the possibility that there was some massive fraudulent effort across the country, and also had a tendency to think in sort of monolithic political terms, that Republicans, are all like this, and Democrats are all like this. And I think, what was so eye-opening to Matt and to me was the integrity of the people of both parties who were responsible for running their elections, and just how insulting it was to them to be accused of having, run something shabbily or fraudulently. Matt, what did you think?
I agreed. That's exactly what I was going to say, was that if you had asked me before we started, I would have guessed that the two sides would be red and blue, that we would be writing about. But in reality, there was truth and lies, and that division cuts through every human heart on both sides.
Yeah, I think that speaks a lot to human nature, and it kind of informs how we can talk to people in 2022. Instead of accusing people of being liars, we can say, hey, we believe in you. We know that you have faith in this democracy. And that can be a way to lift people up instead of tearing people down. And so I'm incredibly grateful that you found this to be true in your research, because I know for a lot of us right now, it hasn't been feeling like that. It feels like integrity has been lost, but you found actual research and data that it is not, that it is here to stay. And so incredibly grateful for the research that you put into this book and for joining us.
It's a brilliant book.
Yeah.
Just brilliant. I can't encourage people enough to get a copy.
Yeah.
Yes. So thank you again for being here with us tonight, and have an incredible 2022.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. I hope again.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hope going around.
Who'd have thought?
Who would have thought? I love this idea of integrity. I love this idea that people aren't, born natural liars. The fact is, I think people at their heart want to be able to want to have a reason to do the right thing. And so I think if we go into this year with that kind of energy and we say, hey, we believe that you want the best thing for your children, for this country. And that means learning how to lose gracefully, and learning how to talk to each other and put in the work to build the democracy, but then also educating each other about the way elections work. Because I think a lot of people, when they see how they actually work, and, as the authors mentioned, I'll go, oh, it's actually not that, it's kind of hard to steal an election. So maybe I need to dial this back a little bit and focus on reality. So
I really appreciated learning from them that they both started the process of researching their book skeptical about the future of American democracy and the integrity of the people who are running our elections, because I think that's where an awful lot of us are at. And if they had started out with sort of a Pollyanna, no, this is America, and things just work here. We're different and special, and things that happen in other places around the world can't happen in the United States. But that's not where they started. And so to have gone through that process and really talk to the people on the ground, and they've done the research, and to come away feeling like, yeah, we can still make this work. There are good people all over the country who have their hands involved in this system. And we all have the ability to also become part of that system and be some of those people with integrity. So folks,
call to action.
There is no reason that anyone who is interested in getting involved in this process, from registering people to vote on up to helping run the elections in your precinct or county, whatever the structure is in your state, you can do that. And it's not too late to do that. there can be a real impact in 2022, and we want to make sure that the folks who do have integrity are not getting pushed out of the process or scared out of the process. We all have to stay in it.
Yes, staying in it in 2022, pacing ourselves, keeping the hope, coming back to it over and over again. That is what we are all about on this show. Incredibly excited for a lot of the shows that we have to come. In the meantime, check out The Breakdown with Tara Setmayer and Rick Wilson. They are returning tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific with a special 1 hour January 6th special. And then we'll see you all next Wednesday at 7 Eastern.
Yeah, that's going to be a really important show tomorrow. Definitely tune into Rick and Tara, and we will see you all soon.